Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Today's topic, the magic of time-lapse photography, presented by NatHab Expedition Leader, Richard de Gouveia. I'm your host, Rob Mess. Thank you all so much for joining us here today. Over to you, Richard.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you all for tuning in today. I'm really excited about teaching you a little bit about time-lapse photography today. Time-lapse photography is not something that everyone dabbles in, and it's sort of a hybrid between photography and videography. So how we're going to do this is let's start delving a little deeper into what it is. So time-lapse photography for me is quite simply being able to take a very large chunk of time and shove it into a small piece. So here's a safari that we were on cruising along, and I stuck a camera on the back of the vehicle, and as you can see, we did a very fast safari. So it was about 2 hours crammed into about 30 seconds. And what this allows us to do is to show things that the eye cannot see. So obviously a game drive or a safari would be a very different situation, but something like clouds moving and sun rays swiveling across is something we can conceptualize, but we might not exactly see that with our eyes because things are moving over time. This is a view from one of our amazing lodges that we visit when we do the Uganda trip to go see the gorillas. This is called Ndali Lodge. Sits on these crater lakes. It's absolutely spectacular, the views around, and the way we're looking out here is towards the mountains of the moon, which you don't often see because of the cloud cover. But time-lapse allows us to show a viewer, a person looking at all of these things, a different view on life, or being able to take that large amount of time and cram it into a small amount of time so that we can see how it's going. It's also become a nice way to do things. So I like doing it on social media. This is one of the lodges we visit on the South Africa trip, Marataba, and here's a time lapse of the mountains. And the mountains, they are so spectacular and unique to game reserves. To have a mountain range moving through those areas is not something you see very often. And even Table Mountain, which is an iconic world feature, it's one of the 7 natural wonders of the world, and it's tablecloth as the clouds move over. Again, you may see clouds over Table Mountain, but you may not get that full idea of how it works. So time-lapse is a great way of explaining time and taking those large chunks and putting them into smaller ones. And it's a brilliant thing to use for short-form videos. I use it a lot in guest videos when we're putting things together to tie things together. And here's another one of a different view as we're going along. But there are many different ways that we can film or photograph these types of things. Everyone thinks that, or the common thought is that photography and video are two very different fields, but effectively video is 24, 25 or 29 photographs taken and strung together one after the other to create a video. So there are 3 ways we can do this. The one way we can do this is by taking a video as normal, put it up, let it go, and then in post-production speed up the video. And what that will do is then shorten the time, and wham bam, you've got exactly what you wanted. The other way we could do it is on our phones. A lot of our phones have a time-lapse function now. Great to use. You click it, you put it down and let it roll, and the camera does everything inside on your phone. Or we step it up to our bigger cameras, which have, a lot of them have a time-lapse function. The one that I use is the Sony Alpha, and they have a S&Q setting, slow and quick setting, where I can do it all in camera. So what the camera does is it takes a photo every second, and then at the end of the allotted time, once I stop the record, it takes those frames, puts them together, and makes a time lapse for me, which is kind of convenient. It means that I don't need a lot of technical skill. It means I can just push the button, point it in a direction, wait 20 minutes, half an hour, 2 hours, however long you want that time lapse to be. And when I push the stop button, the video is created. Or the more intricate way, and we're going to go into a little bit of this as we're going along, because of the fact that I want you to have control. I think photography is really a creative, we all know it's creative, but it's more of an art form than we think it is. And being able to take control of the functions of a camera and take control over how we're going to portray it to the viewer is something I believe heavily in. So what do we need? The first thing we need is quite obviously a camera. Camera is quite important, whether it be your cell phone or a big expensive camera makes no difference. The best camera in the world is the one you have on you. The next best camera, if you have a choice, is a Sony Alpha, but that's just my personal opinion. So a camera is vitally important, and different cameras will offer you different options. If you are still shooting on film, time-lapse photography is not for you. It's not going to be a possibility. It really has become an advent since digital has kicked in and we have a little bit more power to go along with that. Along with that, we have to choose the correct lenses. What is the correct lens? So we've got a range here that I've put up in front, but any lens can be used. It depends on what you're photographing. I do like wider lenses. This is a 16 to 35 millimeter 2.8 Sony. And the reason why I like wide lenses is because very often we're looking to capture movement. And that movement is more than likely either clouds or water. Those are the things that we really can't conceptualize movement over time unless we speed it up and show that. So I like wide lenses. There are so many different to choose from. This is a 24 to 70, which works really well. 12 to 24 mil, again, much wider, depending on what you're doing. The aperture doesn't make a whole bunch of difference because of the fact that very often when we're shooting these things, we want a greater depth of field. We will cover this in a little bit more detail later, but effectively we're wanting more in focus from front to back. So the better the quality of the lens is fantastic, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a fast lens unless we're doing astro lapses, astro time lapses. The next most important thing is a tripod. Hallelujah. This guy here is the most important part to a time-lapse video, hands down. Reason being is because this is what is going to keep your camera still. You can imagine that if you are taking these sequence of moving shots and suddenly the tripod starts to tilt or the camera starts to move, your entire time lapse is going to be thrown out by that. And you would have wasted a whole bunch of time and missed the opportunity to capture what you wanted to capture. Now, I've been through a lot of tripods in my time. I've been doing photography for a while and heavy use photography in between safaris and architectural photography. And I've burned through so many. And the reason why I'm telling you this is because I don't want you to burn through as many as I did, because I eventually ended up paying for 3 very expensive tripods over time. This Peak Design tripod is one that has blown my mind. Just the ergonomics and the thought process that this company puts into all their camera gear is absolutely ridiculous. They've used up a lot of their dead space. It even comes with its own Allen keys stuck to it. They've really thought through every little thing. And it's strong and it's sturdy and it's small. And for a NatAb trip, we know that you are not allowed to pack a hell of a lot. We are limited by to our weight of 44 pounds, which is sometimes makes us pull our hair out, hence the baldness on top of my head. So having a light tripod, this weighs about 3 pounds, is very, very important. It means that I can cut down on my underwear and put my tripod in, and I'm 100% for the trip, and I can be able to do some astro and some time-lapse photography while I'm out there. So pick and choose your tripod carefully. I'd rather go out and spend a couple of $100 extra bucks to get a good one that will last you a lifetime, then go spend 50 bucks or 80 bucks on one and have to buy one every 2 years because the foot comes out or it breaks or something like that. The next thing I use a lot is an intervalometer. So I have an external intervalometer, and then the camera too, which we'll also get into a little bit later, has an internal intervalometer. I prefer the external because it gives me a little bit more control over things, and I can see how it's all running, and especially with astro stuff, I have the ability to turn that on and off as I need. The internal here works very, very well. I like being able to fiddle outside the camera, because if I need to change something, I don't have to touch or move the camera in that case. Another very cool thing that can be used but is an expensive item is a slider. Now, these things can run anywhere up to like $2,000 for a slider. So I don't expect everyone to run out and get one. I don't even have one myself. On specific shoots, I may go rent one because it might work, but for the most part, I don't carry one around. But it creates a very interesting effect, as you can see here with this lapse here. I'll play that again. As it moves along, you get this movement at the top and movement at the bottom, and it gives the real dynamism to the shot, which can very often help in portraying the image a little bit more, and any form of movement within video is vitally important. The next thing is a ND filter. Now, an ND filter, ND stands for neutral density. I'm going to bring this up to the camera, and I'm pretty sure you can see a whole bunch of nothing or very little and come back. All it does is literally block the light. It lets less and less light through, allowing for longer shutter speeds. So the image on the left, taken on a cloudy day, that's as slow as the shutter can get. But as soon as you add that ND filter, you can now shoot for seconds, for minutes at a time without overexposing, allowing clouds and water to become this milky, steamy type of feel to it. And the reason why it plays such an important part in time-lapse photography is because our shutter speeds need to be double what our frame rate is. And if our frame rate is 24 frames a second, we need a 50th of a second shutter speed in order to be able to create the correct flow. If I'm shaking my hand in front here now, you are not seeing my hand do this across. You actually see blur. With photography, we're often so obsessed with the idea of freezing action and getting sharp images that we forget that video actually is about motion and blurring things. And if you do not have the correct blur, it can actually create a very different feel inside a person's brain. Even going from 24 to 25 to 30 frames or 29 frames a second can change the cinematic style and the emotional feel that you get when you're watching it. So there's a lot of research that's gone into these different things. So there are different types of ND filters with different ratings. The biggest thing is either to look at the ND rating, which runs through and tells you how many, the ND rating, and this is how many stops. So the one I have is an ND64, which is a 6-stop reduction in light. Now, effectively what that means is every stop I'm halving the light down. So I need twice as much time to get to the same amount of light. And if I look at percentage of transmission, it allows through 1.5% of the light it would normally have let through if there was no filter. So you can see how much of an impact that's having on light. The other reason why I like carrying this around is specifically because of this water function. If I'm around moving water, waterfalls, things like that, I'm able to slow the shutter speed enough to blur the action to do these, to show how this all works. Another great example of this is a circular polarizing filter. I have one in here. Let's not break that other one. And there it is there. An effectively circular polarizer, you would actually twist to get the right angle. And how this helps is it deepens the blues and the greens, creating this very vivid coloration, which helps our time lapses just have that little bit more punch. Very often used for all forms of landscape photography, just to bring out that color. It also cuts through glare in any water. So if you needed to see through, maybe there's some rocks just in shallow water in front, it'll cut through that glare. And that allows for us to, again, enrich the photo with something else. And you can use both at the same time. They will literally just screw into one another and then screw onto the lens. And when you are purchasing these filters, please again be aware that rather spend extra on one of these, because a lot of them are made out of plastic, the cheaper ones, and they do not transmit light properly, and you will get a softening of the image because of this. So think about what you're doing and when you're doing it. The next part we're going to go into is planning. So there was a saying that a guest once gave to me, and please excuse the language, it's very little bit, but the 7 Ps. Proper prior planning prevents poor performance. And when it comes to time lapse, you have to plan. You have to consider all eventualities, because you're taking into account a chunk of time, a half an hour of time, and squeezing it into a small block. There's so much more planning that needs to go on than taking one photograph. So like Ansel Adams said, you do not take photographs, you make photographs. And it is even more emphasized in time-lapse photography. So the reason why I have this image up here is because this evening, when I was in Namibia and Sossusvlei, an incredible space, beautiful night, probably some of the best skies on the planet to view stars. And I wanted this photo. But in doing so, I also wanted other things. I wanted to create something a little bit more dynamic, motion-filled, that could explain this a little better than just streaks across the sky. So by taking individual photos and then adding them and creating a time-lapse, an addition time-lapse that showed these trails being created, really shows that movement, the spin of the earth and how it's going. So I took 4 hours, and this was the beginning of our dreaded 2020 year of COVID, that our world spun out of control. So there's more to it than that. I didn't know that that was going to be the underlying meaning to the time lapse, but that's what ended up happening. The other thing was, here's a time lapse in a place called Lydenburg, very close to Johannesburg, great fly fishing, very cold, you have these mists rolling in. And the night before, I had scouted out a place to already set up the camera for the next morning, so that when I got out early morning, I could capture the mist rolling through and bubbling up and down the valley there and pushing up and down, showing the coolness and how that was all going. So it was all about a bit of foreplanning and then getting the settings right in camera. Now there are tools that we can use, and there's a great app called Photo Pills. Photo Pills, there's the name there. And what it does is it allows me to set my location. So this was when I was at home in lockdown. I'd set my spot, and I'll jump forward a little bit here. It won't let me. There we go. And I was in my back garden. I'd set up the tent for my son. And effectively what it does is, with the app, will tell you where the sun is and how it's going to move through the day. So you can even check out, how your shadows are going to move, where is it going to go. By using augmented reality, we're able to see where the orange part, I'll just go back to that quickly. So where the orange part is over here, you will see that that is sunset and the twilight hour, and then going into the pink, the purple, which is twilight hour. So it gives you all of this information that you're able to now utilize to assist the planning process. There are other times where, like here, we were in Volcanoes National Park. We just got back from a gorilla trek. This is a mountain called Sabino. The clouds were cruising, and I decided to set it up. You've got to be opportunistic when the moments are there, and if they aren't and you want to create, then you have to plan ahead. So planning is important. So now that we've done our planning, we have to consider our settings. So like I've mentioned, video is shot at either 24, 25, or 29 frames per second. Our shutter speed should be twice this amount. Hence the reason that if it is a bright sunny day out, you will struggle to get to a frame rate of 50th of a second, or 50th or 60th of a second. It's just really near impossible to get to that. So you will have to pop that ND filter on so that you can then see that, so you can slow that shutter speed down to what you need to. And if you really want a smooth appearance, you'll have to slow it down even further to about a second or 3 seconds, especially clouds, because what's going to happen is you're going to get this wisping of the clouds that will now flow into the next wisp and into the next wisp and into the next wisp. So bear that in mind as you're taking these images. Sorry. Now we can do shots in camera. So that, again, Madagascar, jungle, the jungle was breathing. Sorry, that's right at the end. The jungle was breathing. You can see all the mist coming off, and I love seeing that because it really makes me think or feel like that jungle is breathing. And without having to set things up or having a space issue, because I'm on a trip and I don't have unlimited space on card space and everything with me, I decided to do this in camera with my S&Q settings. Now, either your camera will have S&Q settings if you've got a Sony, or it might have a time-lapse function within it, or on your phone, you go to time-lapse function and push start. Now, the S&Q settings in the Sony, we have the ability to do a couple more things that are a little bit more advanced. So I can choose my priority. So I can choose an aperture priority so that more is in focus. I can choose a shutter priority to make sure my shutter speed is correct, or I can go to manual and make sure that that all works the way it needs to if I want to take extra control. So manual is quite a nice place to be, especially for video, because we have the ability to pull it back and forward. Then the S&Q settings, we have a record setting, what frame rate we want to record in. So effectively, that record setting is 25 or 50p, so 50 frames in a second. And then our frame rate is how many photos we are going to take per second. I can go super slow-mo and take 100 frames in a second, or for my time lapse, I want to take one photo every second. At 25 frames per second video, I'm recording 25 frames in a second. Or if I'm doing 50 frames, I'm recording 50 seconds in a second. I'm showing 50 seconds worth of time in a second. So that's one way to remember it. If we are taking individual photos, this all changes. Now you have to start thinking about space. You have to start thinking about how we are going to get to this point. So, and how much time we want to show at the end. So 30 seconds of footage will require 750 photos at 25 frames per second. 1 minute, 1,500, 3 minutes, 4,500. Now, to watch 3 minutes of time-lapse video, it has to be something pretty damn spectacular, because watching clouds floating across the sky for 3 minutes might become a little bit long-winded and I might lose you. If it's a volcano erupting, I could watch it for a little bit longer than that. but I don't know if I want to be that close to a volcano erupting. So we'll just have to measure that up. For the most part, if I'm showing a time lapse in a video sequence, in a photo sequence or anything, I'm doing it for about 7 to 10 seconds maximum. It's a little break. It shows a little piece and then moves on to the next. So consider how long you want to be. I like a 30-second time frame because of the fact that it gives me 30 seconds to choose my 7 to 10 seconds from. That if the light fluctuated during that whole thing, I could pick out a piece that is best representative of what I want to show. So when we're shooting individual photos, we have to consider different things. So we have an interval timer. So this is the built-in interval timer on the Sonys. I'll go to individual shoot function. I'll turn the interval shooting on. I can choose when I want to start. I can start in an hour from now, or 10 minutes, or right now. This is my shooting interval, how much time between photographs, number of shots, how many photos I want to take, and it tells me at the bottom here what my shooting time will be, how long I'm going to be photographing for, so I'll know how much time I'm going to cram into one little piece. So if I know it's going to take me 36 minutes at that to do 730 photographs, and as per the other slide, I can then get 30 seconds. I can choose a tracking sensitivity within this, but for the most part, when I'm shooting time lapses, I'm going to focus on something and I'm going to click my lens over to manual focus because I don't want it autofocusing. I don't want it changing that focus because what it's going to do is it might change, or I'm pointing at a cloud and then it's not there, or it gets dark and it just starts moving around and it messes the whole time lapse up. So consider that too. Photo Pills again has more really cool information about it. What you can do is you can choose here by this, we can go in and choose our clip duration, how long we want our clip length to be, and it will calculate all the other little factors that we need to be able to sort out. So there's our shooting interval needs to be 0.8 at that. We can choose our frames per second. We can choose how big our files are so that we know exactly how much data we're going to chew up. How big is our card? So here's the frames per second. So if I change it to 30 frames per second, it'll change things. Now, my camera, that A1, shoots at 100 megabytes per photo. I need to make sure that that's not going to run out. So even at 24 megabytes, these 2,700 photos are going to take 63 gigs of space. So it gives me all this great information to choose. So you have to choose a card that is fast enough to be able to deal with that changeover, should it be happening fast enough, and that's big enough to be able to carry the information. The other thought process that you have to bring in is whether you'll be shooting in JPEG or RAW. RAW is always preferential because it gives us the ability to edit. And editing is a big part of why it's better to shoot in photographs than take a video for 10 minutes and speed it up. Because we have this ability to push and pull an image. Effectively, a JPEG is an 8-bit photo, which gives us 256 shades of any color from its lightest form to its darkest form. As soon as we get to the biggest RAW file, we have 16,000 shades of that same color from its lightest form to its darkest form, which gives me a lot of push and pull and ability to move things around to be able to create and bring the image back to what my eye saw, or make it a little bit punchier so that it really becomes appealing to those looking at it. The other thing we have to consider is our aperture. Remember that aperture is a function of the size of the hole through which light comes in through the lens in the front here. The bigger the hole, the more light. The smaller the hole, the less light, but the more in focus. So here you can see how at a very wide open thing, we'll have a small depth of field, only a small piece, just the flowers will be in focus. Everything behind it will be blurred. as we increase this depth of field, it moves disproportionately front to back, a third to the front towards the photographer and 2/3 backwards. So as we get deeper, you have to remember that whatever your focus is should be a third of the way into the photograph. And then we want to live at, say, about f8 to f11 is a good space for time lapse to get enough depth of field to show everything from front to back. The next thing we have to consider is ISO. Here's a friend of mine fishing, and you can see the photo before and how dark it was. Our dynamic range is driven by ISO. The higher we push our ISO, the less our dynamic range becomes. The less I'm able to pull out the detail from these darker areas here to make it look like what my eye saw. So we want that ISO really low so that we're able to get as much detail out of the image in post-production after the fact. So what is our shutter interval? Now, this is the key question, because every single situation, depending on how fast it's moving, needs to be taken into account. So here for storms, I reckon between 2 and 3 second intervals gives enough time to be able to capture a storm at its fullest and be able to show that movement and lightning and craziness that's coming along. For calm clouds, clouds that aren't moving too fast, I'd go 3 to 5 seconds, because that gives me the ability to show those clouds moving across the sky. If they were moving faster, I might speed up that time interval, because then they'll be moving too fast across the sky and become not unrealistic, but a little bit chaotic. A sunset will be between 5 and 15 seconds, depending where you are in the world. Here where we are, it's like the sun has cement bags attached to the bottom of it and it falls out of the sky. If you're in the Arctic, it's going to take a while, say 6 months to set. So you would have to consider your timing based on what's going on there. And then stars, very often I don't have much interval between them, but this was 1 second interval between these photographs. And then that star trail light time lapse that I showed you a little earlier was no seconds. It literally went on for bit to bit. Then if you want to get a little bit crazy, doing plants, and the BBC and Nat Geo documentaries where you see plants growing, they take about 1 to 2 shots per hour for 1 to 2 months. There's a lot of dedication, which quite honestly I haven't even dabbled in, but I should. I actually should have done it during lockdown. And then there's what we call the holy grail of time lapses, which is going from sunset into nighttime. And this requires a lot of tweaking of your settings, literally changing your settings as you're going along to be able to do that. But that is a tutorial all on its own, because it can take that amount of time. This one time lapse took about 3 hours to shoot, and it took about 8.5 hours to edit it. So there's a fair amount of commitment that goes into this whole thing. So now what I want to show you, and I've recorded a video from a previous webinar on how I edit these and how I create these time lapses using Lightroom, Adobe Lightroom, and a program called LR Timelapse. And at the bottom of the video, you will see the link that you can use to do it. Otherwise, you can go to my website, richphoto.net, and go to my blog. There's a blog post up there with that link that you can click through to purchase that program should you be interested in it. But enjoy
Lightroom,
this.
And the other one is LR Timelapse. So this is LR Timelapse, and what I will do is I'll find my sequence in LR Timelapse. I will then work out keyframes. So here I'm showing you I've got 5 keyframes, which means I'm going to edit 5 images within this sequence. And that will allow me to not have to edit 180. I've chosen this one because there's sunbeams in this specific time lapse and it looks pretty cool. And what we will do is we're going to look at this time lapse and how it comes out. So I will choose my keyframes, I'll save that, and then I'll drag that into Lightroom. Now, once I've got it into Lightroom, it's now going to import. So I'm going to import all of these images, and I choose the folder where it's going to go, etc., all the normal stuff, and it'll start to import those images as we're going along. Now, what it's done is it's added keyframes. So these keyframes, I will only edit those keyframes. So what I can do is I just click the keyframes. This will then run through, and I have my 5 keyframes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit just these ones. Now, because the sequence is pretty much the same all the way along, what we're going to do is we're going to go to the develop module, and we are going to work through them. So here we go into the develop module, and we're going to edit each one of these images now. So there's some highlights up at the top that are a little blown out, and some of the blacks, you can see the darks are quite low. So the first thing I'm going to do is recover the light in the correct way. We're going to make sure that the light comes through well, and how I'm going to do that is by lifting the shadows and dropping the highlights and making sure that the sun's rays really start to pop. The red areas show the highlights clipped, so we're going to, and the blue areas, the dark. So you can see there how we recover those shadows. And I was trying to keep, now we're getting a better bell curve. Now we've missed all those clip bits there, which is fantastic.
That's just another example of dynamic range and just how I can pull out from what seems like a black foreground to really show what my eye saw. So let's continue.
And now we need to bring back the highlights a little bit. We're going to drop the blacks so that we can create a little bit of contrast. I don't mind a bit of detail lost in those areas. It's not going to be a problem. And now we're going to recover a bit of the highlights so that that goes down. You'll see that that white goes back to nothing at the top there. Right. Then within this, there is a great thing where we will use our texture sliders. We're going to go to the graduated filter, and it automatically, a lot time-lapse installs these 4 points, 2 of them from the top down and 2 of them from the bottom up. So you can see the red areas are where we're going to work. You can move those around as you need to, and you don't need to add any others onto this. So what I'll do is I'll work at the bottom there on that first one. I'll move it up so that I can get to the bottom ground, and I'm only going to work within the red areas. So it's this graduated filter which allows me to work in specific areas. I'll put up the clarity there, some texture, and a little bit of the shadows to pull them out a little bit more. So that's a great way of creating a contrast down there and make that all look good. We're now going to work on the top. So I'm going to look at where that's moving and how the red is impacting that around us. I'm going to cool this down a bit to make the sky a little bluer than what it was. And I'm going to add some texture and some clarity and definitely some dehaze. And dehaze is a great way. Watch how those sun's rays start to pop out. It really helps with the workflow of this whole thing. So clarity, I love the dehaze button for skies, and we can lift the shadows a bit and just create a bit more contrast so we create the punch. Now, you wouldn't be able to do that within a video. I can put the saturation up again to bring the blues out a little bit more, and that will be great. From there, we're going to have to edit across all of these images. So now you can see the final image there. It looks pretty nice. You get the real impact of those rays, and once we move it into a time lapse, you're really going to see them starting to move. So now we've got to sync these across all of the different images. And for this, because they are the same, you have to use that scroll thing up at the top, a lot time-lapse sync keyframes. That means this one will now have taken on the exact same settings as the other one. which really helps us. And because all of these are the same, I'm just going to literally sync them across. We're going to look at a different one where each frame, keyframe, becomes different, and we will have to look at how we do that. So we're going to edit through that shortly. I had so much sports trying to put these things together last night. My computer was not loving me and was dying and switching off and doing crazy things. So I'm happy that we got to get these all out to you guys. While this is running through, I'm just going to check if there are any questions. The Sun app is called back in, and we've now reloaded the 5 images that we've now worked on, and we're doing auto transition. So now, because I've worked on 5 images, what it's going to do is it's going to work out what the difference is and how I change those images and create a slow curve to make it work perfectly. And it is a beautiful thing to do. We then click the visualization button, the visual previews, and this will create a visual preview of what our thing looks like. So if I hit the play button down there, we'll actually get a visual playback of what it's going to look like. We can then do a deflicker, which is where light actually changes a little bit between frames. And within this, you can either smooth it out or slow it down, but it has this incredible way of working, and it works really fast and very accurately to be able to do that. We can even do a deflicker multiple times or choose spaces where we do it. But you can go check out LR Timelapse. I'm going to put a link to LR Timelapse in my social media menu and in my Instagram feed, in my bio. So now what we're going to do is we're going to read the data from the files. So that now LR Timelapse has made changes to it. Now we're going to read that so that all of those changes will then go across all of these. I'm just going to speed it up by taking or filtering out these things, and it can roll through and do what it needs to do faster. And what that's going to do now is it places all the minute changes of editing have automatically been done by LR Timelapse. It's an incredible thing. Then we go to our library, we select all, and we export. Now we can choose our output path, the name of where we're going to go, this resolution we're going to export at, and what type. So we can do JPEG, 8-bit, 16-bit, TIFF. It all just depends on which thing you choose to go from. But then we're going to hit export, and once that goes, that's then going to run through an entire export situation where we then, I've already done it, so we'll go back here. And what it does is it pops up this little render screen, which I'm going to open here. There's my render screen, says where it's from, where it's going to, chooses our, we then choose our codec of what we want. MP4 is an easy file size. I like 4K because it gives me space to move things around, like I was saying in Premiere Pro, that we can move things around. We then have frame rates, so I can choose different frame rates. At 24 frames, it's going to give us 7 seconds. If I go to 29, it's going to drop it to 6 seconds. And so we can change the whole thing. So I'm going to choose 24 there. Quality, I always choose high unless the video needs more. I will then go to very high and ultra high, but very high, high is fine. I can force a 16:9 crop on that, or I can just leave it where it is. And when I do and move that around, or I can just leave the forced unclicked, which I'm going to do because I prefer to be able to do that in post in Premiere Pro myself. So I will choose where that goes, how it's going to go there. Then I can choose my motion blur, how much motion blur I want. If I couldn't slow my shutter speed enough, I could do it post in here, and I can sharpen the image. So I'm going to click render video. It's then going to run through the process down the bottom here really quickly because I speeded it up. And at this point it died a few times. Okay, and then once it's done, it opens up this dialog box with our video. So if we open the video, am I going to do that? No, I'm going to open Premiere Pro, and I'm going to drop it straight into Premiere Pro, and then we're going to edit it now. So I have a a project there called Timelapse. Open up Timelapse. I'm going to go to my editing view, and I'm going to drop that into Premiere Pro. And this is where I'm now going to mimic that movement that I was talking about. So I'm going to choose a new sequence. I'm going to choose what I want. So I've chosen a 1080p 24 frames a second. I'm calling it an Ndali time lapse because it is at a place called Ndali in Uganda. I'm then going to drag that time lapse onto the thing and say, keep existing settings, the ones I chose. Because remember, it was shot in 4K. So now because it's 4K, it's bigger than what the rest of the screen is. I need to change my sizing to 50% so that I get the right amount in there, and I can move these around. Now, this is where I generate the movement. Now, there's a lot of tutorials on this, guys. I know it's running through fast, but I just want to give you a good idea of how I create this and what my thought process is behind it. What we'll do then is I now want to create a beautiful bit of movement, slow movement besides the clouds, which will give it the camera a dynamic feel. So I'm going to zoom in here. I'm going to move it down a little bit so that we have a better feel of that little, there's a little crater lake at the bottom there. And you can see my keyframes being formed just to the right of my cursor. There we go. And that's my zoom in. I'm going to drop it still a little bit more there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move those two keyframes to the beginning of the sequence. So now that's the zoom in that's going to affect it. And now I'm going to create a new keyframe of 50, and I'm going to put these back to what their normal values are so that I can get back to that. Now what I've done is I've created a second keyframe for each of these, scale and movement, and I can move those out. Now, when I do the playback, which I'll do down here, you will see the camera move back. So it gets wider and wider, and we get this very different view.
So that's basically the process that I'll go through with each and every edit. It takes time, it takes computing power, it takes patience, it takes love, but the results that come out of it at the end are really spectacular. And I really love the dynamic nature of it. So I hope you guys have enjoyed that. Rob, if you've got any questions for me, I'm happy to take those.
Thank you, Richard. Now, before we start the question and answer session, I would like to remind everyone that you can submit your questions via the question field in your control panel. And I've also put the link to the LLR time lapse in the chat function if anyone wants to click through on that. With that, let's get to some questions. This tripod that you recommended, could you tell us the name of the company and what the name of the tripod is again?
Sure thing. It's a Peak Design. The company is called Peak Design. They only make one tripod, but it comes in two forms, either a carbon fiber, which is slightly lighter, or a aluminium, which is a little bit heavier, but I think like half a pound heavier, so not all that much difference. But really, really spectacular. Just its ease of use, its lightness, it's a magical piece of equipment. Truly, I think I own 5 tripods, and I'm never going anywhere without this one.
All right, thank you. And as far you talked about your Sony camera, can you tell us which particular Sony that is again, so we know what to look for?
So I use 2 different cameras. I have a Alpha 1, a A1, and an Alpha 9 Mark II. My preference for this would be the Alpha 1, specifically because of the high megapixel ratings. It allows me to take bigger images, which then allows for more of that movement that I was talking about at the end there, being able to shift an image or move the video across. It's also probably the best wildlife camera on the planet at the moment, and it blows my mind every day when I use it.
All right. Now, do you have any plans in the future for a session about taking a time-lapse photo from sunset to night and the setting changes?
Yeah, we can definitely make it. Daily Dose is our little nest egg of places. So I'll happily do that, and we'll run through everything from every setting as we go along. So look out for it in the new year. I'll make a plan to get that going.
Great, thank you, Richard. But that's the last question that we have at this point. So I'd like to throw it back to you for any closing comments you have.
Thanks everyone for listening in, and thank you, Rob, for hosting, and NatHab for making the opportunity for this. Really is a privilege to be able to chat to you all in the evenings like this. It's late at night here, and I wish you all a very amazing festive season and a happy new year, and may 2022 see the end of this craziness that is holding our planet hostage at the moment. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you so much for taking the time to present for us today, Richard. And I'd also like to thank everyone who tuned in today. Join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody. We'll see you next time.